Uh-huh. Okay, okay.
Not me, I've got a very common name, I mean, there are a lot of people in France having the same name, more or less. City and linguistic policies in Europe too, because this is also some kind of important issue.
Are there many scholars from India or Asian countries?
In France, yeah, yeah. Okay.
All right. Okay. So, good afternoon, one and all. Welcome to the fifth keynote of the day of the conference, which is on the interdisciplinary investigation of the relationship between media, culture, and society by Jacques Guyot, who is a professor emeritus with the University of Paris. He's also a member of the Center for Study of Media, Technology, and Globalization, and also the coordinator of the European Intensive Program on Newsmaking and Journalistic Practices in Europe. He's an expert in the field of media and communication and has special research interest in political economy of communication, globalization of audiovisual media, and audiovisual cultural policy studies of Europe, journalistic practices in Europe, and also, as he stated, the language minorities around the world. And he has several national and international publications, both in forms of articles and books. And he has been especially collaborating with scholars and practitioners from Southern America. And he has delivered invited lectures around the globe, including Cuba, Spain, and China. Professor Jacques, it's an honor to have you on our program. Welcome to Bharat Mata College.
Well, thank you very much. I would like also to thank Dr. Mini Abraham, head of the Department of English, for inviting me to this online conference on theory and discursive practices in the age of interdisciplinarity. And also, of course, special thanks to Dr. Rose Sebastian. I met when she participated in the conference I organized in Paris in December 2016. It sounds like a long time ago now, but I mean, it's for me a pleasure to be with you today. Now, today I would like to talk about interdisciplinarity from the perspectives of my own research and academic field, that is to say, what we call in France, sciences of information and communication. In my abstract, I was saying that when dealing with the relationship between media, culture, and society, interdisciplinarity has always been a major issue for researchers. As a matter of fact, a wide outlook crossing the analysis from different social sciences sounds like a necessity to understand the social, political, anthropological, and also economic consequences of communication tools on our everyday life. And this need for interdisciplinarity appeared very soon during the 20th century with the development of media and international cultural exchanges. Now, this was the case with media studies and the emergence of academic interdisciplines like mine, sciences of information and communication, that mix the contributions of political economy of communication, linguistics, of course, sociology, anthropology, semiotics, and others. Two examples illustrate what interdisciplinary can mean when an investigation project appeals to researchers belonging to different academic fields. The first one is minority language groups struggling to protect their cultures and languages, something I've been working on for the last 20, 25 years. And also the making of television news as studied by the Glasgow University Media Group. I've got an article about this particular group that I studied a few years ago. Now, on the second slide, I try just to move forward. What's going on? It's down there. Here it is. On this second slide is the plan of my presentation in more or less 6 paragraphs. And I will be using, I would say, a simple illustration on the other slides, little text, but mostly front covers of what I consider as being major books in my field. Now, starting with the emergence of communication studies, I would like to introduce the general context, the historical context, and of course the machine universe of the 19th century's industrial era gave birth to the first investigations on the bias of communication by Harold Innis, and on the anthropological and political consequences of an extensive use of technique in our civilizations, referring to the book of Lewis Mumford. And then in the 1930s, the academic community started paying special attention to the psychological and social effects of mass media, as well as what will be labeled a few years later as information society, especially with the development of informatics and network society. I refer to the investigations of Manuel Castells. Now, right from the beginning, the researchers concerned waved between, on the one hand, the ability media have, and first of all, cinema, to bring people closer, to entertain them, to inform them, and also to break solitude. And on the other hand, on the mechanism, whether actual or alleged, influencing or alienating individuals. They used by movies by the Nazi regime during the Second World War, of course, greatly contributed to question propaganda methods. And many investigations will then privilege scientific approaches based whether on empirical works like the field surveys in the perspective of applied, or what was called administrative. I've got to change the. Sorry, I forgot to do that. Right. So many investigations were based whether on empirical works like the field surveys in the perspective of applied, or administrative research, like the job done by Paul Lazarsfeld, or on more critical investigations condemning the massification of behaviors caused by the cultural industry. I use the term in the singular because at that time, this was the notion developed by Adorno and Horkheimer, and also by the works of Herbert Marcuse. Now, in this specific context, and according to different temporalities and agendas, a wide range of investigations analyzing the role played by media and communication technologies in modern society appeared. And in the first place in North America, mainly because of the early development of mass media and cultural industries. Now, from the starting in the 1940s, sociologists like Paul Lazarsfeld, Elliot Katz, Robert Merton, George Gertner, philosophers like Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, Walter Benjamin, Herbert Marcuse, psychologists like John Watson, was the promoter of a theory of behaviorism, or George Bateson, semioticians like Charles Peirce, Roland Barthes, linguists like Roman Jacobson, economists like Dallas Smith or Graham Murdoch, political scientists like Harold Laswell, started investigating on mass media until the need for an interdiscipline made it possible, both in a global approach and multidisciplinary perspective, to gather researchers capable to deal with the complexity of communication phenomena and of the mechanism linked to newsmaking and circulation. Now, beyond a strong concern for specific topics, which are still present in the research, like, for example, political communication and propaganda, advertising, many investigations about that particular field, or the impact of media on people, and particularly on children. What was expected from the academic world was to enhance and guide the social acceptability of information and communication technologies, because, as you know, it's a sector characterized by an endless change, making it even more difficult to draw up a clear line between what comes under academic investigation and, on the other hand, social expertise. Now, this dilemma between investigation and expertise was commented quite a long time ago by the German sociologist Max Weber in an article called "The Professor and the Politician," when he would compare science and politics as being two divergent vocations. The first one requires humility and intellectual availability, while the latter, torn between, this is the thing Weber expresses, between the ethics of conviction and the ethics of responsibility. So it was caught into an inextricable contradiction, which leads, of course, to exclude, from the politicians, to exclude scientific certainties. Now, when dealing with the relationship between media, culture, and society, as I said, interdisciplinarity has always been a major issue for researchers. And the notion of interdisciplinarity itself has been much debated and competing with other similar notions like multidisciplinarity, pluridisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity. And today my purpose is not to make a choice, which is the better notion, but rather to concentrate on what seems most important for the present debate. That is to say, a methodological and epistemological position against monodisciplinary approaches. And this because interdisciplinarity involves a work of contextualizations of social events, involves also the interconnection with other academic fields, and not just the mere juxtaposition of disciplines, which would in the end keep their own autonomy, but rather a field where there would be an opportunity for each discipline to question its own presupposition. Another dimension too is the mixing of macro, meso, and micro dimensions, and also to use concepts, methods, and tools that are common to all social sciences. I'll have the opportunity to develop this particular thing later in my intervention. Now, to quote the 17th century philosopher and mathematicians, he was also in some kind of interdisciplinary approach, Blaise Pascal, it is, I quote, as impossible to know the parts without knowing the whole as to know the whole without knowing the particular parts. And to take the case of my own interdiscipline, I would like to take the example of the French journal Communications. It was the first one in my country to get interested in the study of mass communication, journalism, and cultural industries. It was founded in 1960 within the sixth section of the École pratique des hautes études, at the initiative of George Friedman, a sociologist who was working at that time on the social impact of industrial labor on automation and technique. And what was interesting is the journal opened up its column to American investigators who were at that time pioneers in terms of mass media communication. I'm thinking about people like Morris Janowitz, Robert Schultz, who presented the research trend in the field of mass communication, or someone quite well known in the United States, in the field of investigation and communication phenomena, Daniel Bell, on the forms of the cultural experience. It was also open to a wide range of French intellectuals, sociologists like Edgar Morin, semiologists like Roland Barthes, Zvetan Todorov, and others, economists. I just quote the names just to be more accurate, but I mean, I guess that not all of them are well known abroad. Economists like Henri Mercillon, philosophers like Violette Morin, and many others, as well as foreign researchers. For example, in one of the first issues of Communication, the sociologist R.N. Saxena wrote something about Indian about the movie industry in India. And for example, also the Italian linguist Umberto Eco. The journal Communications then confirms its interdisciplinary vocation in 1973 when changing the previous name, which was Center of Mass Communication Studies, into Center of Transdisciplinary Studies, Sociology, Anthropology, Semiology. And I've got to say that Communications, it's still a major and well-known journal in the in the field of French media studies. And it's, of course, open to more disciplines than the one mentioned in the former title. Now, there are other academic disciplines which are built around the idea of an interdiscipline gathering different scientific perspectives. Among others, for example, the educational sciences with sub-branches like pedagogy, sociology, psychology, educational policies, and so on. In France, I guess that's just about the same thing in India, in Indian universities. Anglo-Saxon studies are divided into different trends, like, for example, literature with people who are specialized in the 18th century or the 19th century writers and so on, but also in what we call civilization studies. I mean, many English professors are specialized, for example, in the history of the United States and so on. We found also that kind of approach in environmental studies, mixing biology, geography, climatology, ecology, economy, anthropology, and so on. Now, in all cases, the results of interdisciplinary investigations nourish a better global and accurate understanding of often complex phenomena. Now, nevertheless, the existence of interdisciplines dedicated to the study of what we call an object of an investigation, like mass media or the relationship between media culture and society, is generally a new trend in the research agendas, and most of these interdisciplinary approaches appeared rather recently, I would say more or less in the 1970s. In other words, interdisciplinarity is also understood by some researchers as the only way to address the challenges caused by modern societies, and especially what Jacques Ellul, a French philosopher, called the technological system. That is to say, a society where technique inexorably invaded all the human activities and touches all aspects of modern life to the point where no other alternative is possible. Every problem leads to a purely technical solution. I could give example of what it implies. Now, anyway, many people are aware of the many interactions that make the understanding of our society more complicated. Hence, the need to multiply the scientific theories, methodologies, and tools to tackle in a collaborative way such objects of investigation, like, for example, the climate change. These are typical topics: social inequalities, the GAFAMs and our privacy, the digitization of public services. That is to say, topics that cannot be investigated from a single discipline with a unique theory of concept or with a unique methodology and with a unique tool. Each academic discipline may bring a specific insight, and I will develop this particular point in my case studies. Nevertheless, as an institution, the universities, as well as many research funding institutions, whether public or private, national, supranational, or international, still favor monodisciplinary projects. Many researchers, and this is something I would like to point out too, belonging to academic faculties, still remain bound to their discipline and prefer to live in their ivory tower and are sometimes quite reluctant to work in a team. Indeed, there are many factors that make it difficult to think research in an interdisciplinary perspective. And this is what I'm going to comment now. And first of all, the academic field, according to Pierre Bourdieu, who theorized this notion of field, was built in the course of time, not only for scientific concerns. There's this commonly shared myth by people of the scientific altruism, that it would be something purely dedicated to the to the welfare of society. But so it's not, according to Bourdieu, this myth is a problem, because the academic field was not built only for scientific concerns, but it was also built in terms of internal power struggles. The way academic disciplines appear also has to do with intellectual traditions. For instance, it's often said in the academic community that science is viewed in the North American academic world as a means to improve or to improve society, what we call positivist science, whereas European researchers would be more in a critical approach inherited from our philosophical background and history. Anyway, one of the first challenges interdisciplinarity has to face is the increasing fragmentation and specialization of social sciences. As a matter of fact, even if each disciplinary field share specific founding principles, hypotheses, concepts, methods, and tools, for example, the fields of analysis of psychology is in that respect quite different from the sociologists, as pointed out by the sociologist Émile Durkheim. But each discipline is quickly organized in branches and sub-branches according to the level of specializations of the researchers, and also according to the social and political demand. And in that respect, if we take the example of sociology, can be divided in many branches: general history, historical general sociology, historical sociology, sociology of knowledge, criminology, sociology of religion, of economy, rural sociology, urban sociology, political sociology, sociology of law, sociology of the family, sociology of culture, sociology of labor, of leisure, and so on. The list is absolutely not exhaustive. And as for psychology, the discipline integrates also many sub-branches, like, for example, behavior psychology. I was talking about John Watson before, clinical psychology, cognitive psychology, development psychology, educational, experimental, organizational, health, sports psychology, and in the same way, the list is absolutely not exhaustive. Now, the same process could be repeated and repeated for other traditional disciplines like history, law, anthropology, or geography. Now, just to take one example, under the code 300, which is related to social sciences, sociology, and anthropology, the Dewey Decimal Classification scheme, which is used by libraries to classify the books, lists 100 themes. And the principle of this decimal system is to add a category as the development of new fields of knowledge goes on. So hence, for example, the number of unassigned items in the list, because it follows, the evolution of knowledge. Now, this wide variety of specialized subdiscipline or branches can, of course, be an obstacle to interdisciplinarity. This is what, for example, a French sociologist, Bernard Lahire, points out in a book whose translation in English is Plural World, Thinking the Unity of Social Sciences. And this book sounds really like a real manifesto in favor of interdisciplinarity. For Lahire, the increasing subdivision of academic disciplines leads to extreme scattering of the research works, as many investigators study very, very particular aspects and very small parts, bits of what should be a more general program consisting in reasoning in terms of social practices, they say action, behaviors, and so on. Now, instead, most researchers limit themselves to a monographic approach, which makes them what we could call hyper specialists of a very small part of the social, and which makes them also lose the sense of what the sociologists call social totalities, and also the interdependence links between different fields of scientific practices. Now, Lahire views the situation as the consequence of the division of labor existing in capitalism, with the obligation to be more productive, to be more efficient, to be more innovative in terms of providing concrete solutions or recommendations. In other words, the researcher becomes an expert. Now, clearly, research institutions as well as political authorities foster also a new image of social sciences, which should be more receptive to economical and political demands, less critical and more in tune with the expectations of the capitalist marketplace. For the research institutions or private foundations that fund investigators, calls for proposal and tenders give priority to framework programs around sometimes very technical and specialized projects, generally determined by industrial or economical development logics. Now, I take the example of the program of the European Union called Connecting Europe Facility. It's a project which is being presently launched to modernize the railway, for example, the railway network, and reduce the noise of freight trains. All the projects usually run for 2 years with a maximum of 4 or 5 years. But this particular program is split into different sub-programs and includes one, for example, strictly dedicated to upgrade existing road infrastructures, or another one on multimodal passenger hubs. One last example with a framework program which is called Horizon Europe, and which is labeled for research and innovation, because I mean, in most investigation projects now, research is interesting when it innovates, okay? And it's a program going starting in 2021 and going to 2027. Now, here again, I'll just quote something which is interesting. It's a new project which is dedicated to high technology and the development of floating offshore mill platforms. It's in the something which is linked to what we call sustainable development of sustainable energies, you know, so with the wind or with the sea in that particular case. So the development of floating offshore mill platforms, which clearly claims, they just put that in the document, a multidisciplinary approach. However, social sciences, I just give the quote first of all. It says, thus, it requires the effective contribution of social sciences disciplines and the involvement of social science experts, institutions, as well as the inclusion of relevant social science expertise in order to produce, and this is quite important, meaningful and significant effects enhancing the social impact of related research activities. So in other words, to make things clear, to decode to the language of the European Union, it's a project mainly aimed at engineers, but in that particular context, social sciences are called to ensure the social acceptability of the project, because in France, for example, at the moment, many of those offshore mill platform and also the windmills are contested by the population. You know. Now, as for to move on, as for political institutions and governments, it's been a long time since they started attacking social sciences, generally because they're considered as being useless and unproductive, but also because they were considered by many governments as potential clusters of protest. I mean, all the social science faculties are considered as being potential clusters of protest. I give a list of on the slide of political intervention that I'm going to comment quickly. The first one is starting on the Reagan, but for example, on June 2015, the Japanese Ministry of Education sent a letter to all public universities and advised them to cut down on the budgets allocated to the faculties of social and human sciences. Right? In Turkey, after the coup in 2016, many academics were dismissed sine die by President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and purges went on, and the academic community went through a fierce suppression and repression from the political power that condemned the investigators and teachers for being guilty of petitioning for peace in the world or supporting Kurdish claims. In 2019, in Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro brutally reduced the fundings granted to the faculties of sociology and philosophy, pointing out how useless their contribution to the country was. So at international level, many researchers are in the best case not allowed to do their fieldwork, for example, because they cannot get a visa, like in China, for the people who investigate on the Tibetan or on the Uyghur, which are two sensitive, very sensitive issues presently in China. It's just like a taboo, you know. And in the worst case, put in jail for breach to state security. This is what happened to for example, to the anthropologist Farida Al-Dekkak, who was arrested in Iran in July 2020. Well, the problem is that such mistrust towards social sciences is not a speciality of authoritarian regime, and the liberal democracies in which we live also tend to blacklist and social and human sciences. And this can be explained by the general anti-intellectual climate promoted as soon as 1983 by Ronald Reagan, who was vilifying, and I quote, social philosophy for seeing man as being mainly the outcome of his material environment. So this was a way for the former president of the United States to show that social inequalities had less to do with the responsibility of states to ensure citizens' welfare than with the individual's inability to grasp their own destiny. So within that particular context, there's one term, which is the excuse culture. And this term can be found in most political discourses, whether left or right wing. There's absolutely no difference in Great Britain, in the United States, in France, and is aimed at denouncing the intellectual and researchers who investigate social movements. Social and human sciences are tolerated are tolerated only when they privilege the trends that advocate the individual strategies of social actors rather than social determinations, when they celebrate the virtues of the new technologies of information communication or the power of artificial intelligence, rather than revealing the mechanism of the digital divide. Now, in 2015, this in Switzerland, again, put forward the useless of social sciences to the great displeasure of the Dean of the Faculty of Arts of Lausanne, who wrote an article in the national papers and also in France, entitled Social Sciences Has Never Been So Useful. So to protest against this problem. In France, the former Prime Minister Manuel Valls declared in front of the senator in November 2015 that studying terrorism, like sociologists or political scientists do, was a way to excuse it. So in an answer to the Prime Minister, a sociologist wrote a book explaining what sociology was. That is to say, a science aimed at disclosing the social mechanism, but also at understanding the social rather than judging it. In the USA, on behalf of the Patriot Act voted after the 9/11 attack against the Twin Towers, many investigators were placed under surveillance and could no longer carry on their research project. Now, these recurrent attacks from governments, politicians, really hit the bullseyes in a context of crisis and insecurity due to terrorism or at the moment the pandemic, and above all question the scientific legitimacy of social sciences. It's also linked to the rise of neoliberal policies advocated by Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher in their struggle for less state intervention. The motto, Margaret Thatcher's motto was to say, there is no alternative, TINA, T-I-N-A. And they imposed the criteria of performance and profitability to all public institutions and services, a movement that finally reached the universities, So hence the emergency to gather forces in an interdisciplinary perspective. Now, when we get to the problem of defining interdisciplinarity, for example, as a sociologist, Bourdieu, which is considered by many people, not just in France, as the emblematic figure of the universal intellectual, was himself quite involved in commenting the results of other disciplines. For example, in his book on language and symbolic power, he questions the theories of Ferdinand de Saussure, who wrote a book called Course on General Linguistics, but also the theories of Noam Chomsky, his books on syntactic structures and not on media control and manufacturing consent. Also, John Austin, the famous book, How to Do Things with Words and the Theory of Speech Acts. And he was arguing that language should also be considered as a means of power and not only as a means of communication. So it means that as a sociologist, he had something to say which was questioning the way linguistic theories by Saussure, Chomsky, or Austin were presented. He also criticized, I went too far, sorry. Sorry, I've been going too far. I think I should go back, but okay. Okay, this is it. Sorry. He also criticized journalism and in one book on television and journalism, and produced remarkable essays on art. But we can say that Bourdieu was involved in other disciplines than just the one of sociology. Now, in the same way, psychologists imposed the idea that everything related with the human psyche belonged to them. And for example, when studying the love relationships, And recently, for example, an Israeli sociologist, Eva Iluz, wrote a book about the end of love. That's the title of the book, where she shows how contemporary capitalism plays a major part in practices of non-choice and unloving, and how a new generation are consumers of ephemeral relationships that condemn them to remain single. In the same way, Bernard Lahire, that I quoted previously, a French sociologist, challenged psychoanalysis and documented in an extensive, thanks to an extensive field survey, how dreams are directly linked to our social life and particularly our jobs, and how they express concerns about the professional universe, and sometimes help us make a decision. And the book is called A Sociological Interpretation of the Dreams, which is more or less a way to position himself against Freud and his book on the interpretation of the dreams. Now, in the same way, political science has no longer the monopoly of studying political practices and campaigns or the elector's behavior, when linguists, media scientists, semiologists use discourse analysis or semiopragmatics to work on political speeches or media representations, while sociologists work on taxonomics or classifications of socioeconomic profiles of the electors. So we can find many examples at the same time of researchers who invest other disciplines, thus renewing both the interpretation of human behaviors and the scope of disciplinary boundaries. Now, interdisciplinarity also implies to share common notions. Well, presently, notions like identity or representations or minorities, it's a notion that is quite familiar to me when I talk about language minorities, appear in a wide variety of investigation projects. For example, identity is meaningful in anthropology, in sociology, in psychology, in semiology, to quote some of the disciplines where that particular notion has been really structuring investigations for quite a long time. Identity is now a key concept in media studies. There are many works around digital identities on social networks, or in studies about migrations, around identities and integrations, in marketing and management studies, around identities and ethnic consumption, in gender studies, of course, in post-colonial studies, in cultural studies, with, for example, the hybridization of cultures, tourism and cultural identities, and so on. Well, notion as well results from different investigations that can typically be exported into other fields of research because they have a heuristic scope. Another factor that participates in extending the capacities of interdisciplinarity is the use of common methods and tools. As far as methods are concerned, I can list a number of things like inquiries, questionnaires, surveys, interviews, life stories, mental maps, which are regularly used in sociology, anthropology, psychology, turn out to be very fruitful to get quantitative and qualitative information. For example, in my specific job, a whole part is dedicated to interviewing, for example, people in indigenous or linguistic minorities, and also to work, for example, around the life stories of a number of major figures of the autochthonous movements. Now, researchers also use informatics tools to process data and to produce, for instance, multiple factor analysis that allow to visualize complex phenomena. Specific software facilitate the analysis, for example, of audiovisual documents, or making the inventory of the occurrence or frequency of terms in speech analysis is now much easier thanks to lexicological programs. All researchers now resort to online bibliographical databases, which considerably help drawing up the state of the art of the scientific literature. In the end, many digital tools are now part of every researcher's toolbox. And now to conclude, I would like to comment two case studies which illustrate this need for interdisciplinarity. Now, the first one comes from a conference I organized in Paris called Cultures of Resistance, Minorized Languages and People. Minorized because for me it's a process of domination. Now, when the call for proposals was launched, it was sent not only to the international and national associations related to the field of media, culture, and communications, like, for example, the International Association for Media and Communication Research, the European Communication Research and Education Association, the South American Association of Investigations in Communication, or the French Society of Sciences of Information and Communication, but also to associations related to other disciplinary fields like anthropology, sociology, law, literature, linguistics, plus personal contacts through academic networks of international researchers. Now, let me first quickly remember the topic of the conference as mentioned in the call for proposals. So this is I just quote now, okay? The International Conference Cultures of Resistance, Minorized Peoples and Languages aims at questioning the way states deal with minorized languages and cultures within their national territory, as well as the modes of resistance minorized people deploy to defend their rights, the building of nation states around the territory, a political project and a language, an official language, I mean, led to a formidable linguistic normalization process, resulting in the exclusion from the public sphere of other languages spoken within the country's geographic limits, condemning them to disappear sooner or later. Now, faced with this mechanism of minorization, where such cultures and languages still do exist, they mainly owe it to the unfailing mobilization of their members who struggle so that idiosyncrasies may benefit from official recognition. Over the years, associations, communities, and groups of activists dedicated to the linguistic cause have organized individual or collective actions, mobilizations, and initiatives like demonstrations, development of alternative models in the fields of education or media, complaints to national, supranational, and international courts of law, promotions of cultural traditions, music, festivals, museum, literature, poetry, dance, ecotourism, pharmacopoeia, etc. Struggles for specific rights, whether linguistic or territorial, or general rights, full access to citizenship or political representation. Now, the main issue was to determine what characterizes the range of collective actions mobilized by the minorized group that are resisting in different historical and socio-political contexts, and around 4 lines of research that you can now read. The political dimension, the legal framework that can be found in international conventions or national constitutions. When I'm talking about international conventions, I just mean the one by the UNESCO and also by the International Organization of the Work. The economic dimension, too. In many countries, there are conflict about the exploitation of resources, for example, in the Amazonian forest. So, I mean, the tensions are, again, this economic factor, and also the different experiences and initiatives linked to social mobilization. So anyway, the idea in that call for proposals for that conference was to address other disciplines than my own, and to open the conference to an overview of intervention in order to document as much as possible the variety of issues minority languages and peoples have to face. And in that respect, 31 papers were selected for the conference, including 4 keynote speakers, and ultimately 23 papers were published in a book which was edited in 2020. Now, the contributions come from researchers belonging to 4 continents, 14 countries, 11 academic disciplines for anthropology, arts, educational sciences, law, linguistics, literature, media studies, philosophy, political science, sociology, and science of information and communication. Now, all the investigators had in common to work on minority languages and cultures, but from their specific disciplinary field. And consequently, they bring to light a variety of situations, experiences, conflicts, and initiatives, and contribute to build a vast and contrasting overview of the social, political, cultural dynamics involved in struggling for cultural and linguistic diversity. For the reader, too, and it was an important matter to me, this interdisciplinarity-based book gives a better understanding of the issues related to revitalizing minority languages and cultures. And because, of course, a similar conference restricted to, for example, linguists would have led to a series of specialized monographies, that is to say, things which would be reserved to a small academic community of researchers in linguistics. The case of the Glasgow University Media Group is quite symptomatic of what an interdisciplinary approach can lead to in terms of collective investigation. Well, I had the opportunity, I said that before, to write an article about this original academic adventure in a book I edited with 2 other colleagues called Materialism, Culture, and Communication. And this is, for me, a quite interesting case. When in 1976, the researchers belonging to the newly created collective called the Glasgow University Media Group wrote in the introduction of their first book, Bad News, that TV news was a cultural artifact and not a neutral product, they started questioning one of the major dogmas structuring the journalistic activities of the British television, BBC and ITN, whose editorial boards always claimed a balanced and unbiased treatment of information. According to them, for example, this is what written in that book, television news would be more objective than the press. TV journalists would be careful in presenting the different point of views impartially, in giving equal speaking time to the participants, in using a neutral tone and vocabulary, and in offering TV viewers the different competing arguments so they could, in the end, make up their own mind. This vision of newsmaking is very much, for me, in the style of the public sphere promoted by the German philosopher Jürgen Habermas. But this vision of newsmaking was widely questioned by the Glasgow group, which dissected and analyzed over a vast period of time, spreading over 50 years, not only the content of news reports and news bulletin, but also journalistic routine and practices, as well as the social, academic, and professional backgrounds of the journalist, the modes of reception of TV messages, and in a more general way, the economic and political structures behind TV newsmaking. Now, to do so, to examine and put apart this sacrosanct myth of journalistic objectivity, or at least of a balanced treatment of information, the Glasgow University Media Group needed to gather a collective of researchers belonging to different academic areas, able to work in the long run, as we saw, something which was quite new and original in the 1970s in media studies. This new approach involved deploying vast frames of analysis ranging from describing contents of images to political economy of communication. But the group also had to experiment to experiment new innovative methods to study, for example, the audiovisual material that was at that time ephemeral and fleeting. In the 1970s, was very hard to work on TV material, since it was recorded on videotapes. Now, the research program initiated by the group is surely ambitious and was organized like that the image I have, like a real work site. The researchers came. I'm sorry for the long list I give now, but I mean, it's just to show the origin of the people in terms of disciplines and also geographically speaking. The researchers came from sociology around Greg Philo, University of Glasgow, surrounded by other sociologists and co-leaders of the project, Peter Beherer from the Liverpool's College of Higher Education, Howard Davis, University of Kent, John Elrich, University of Glasgow, John Hewitt, Liverpool College of Higher Education. Others came from communication studies, like Paul Wharton from the Goldsmiths College, cinema studies, Brian Johnson from State University of New York, literature and theater, the freelance writer Jean Oddy. Other investigators joined the Glasgow University group later, like Mike Berry, Faculty of Arts, University of Nottingham, John Kitzinger, Sociology, University of Glasgow, Kevin Williams, Communication Studies, University of Wales, David Miller, Sociology, University of Stirling, Philip Schlesinger, Media Studies, University of Stirling. Now, other investigators occasionally joined the group as contributors, like Derek Bussey, Media Studies, Annenberg School for Communication in the US, Noam Chomsky, known as also as a famous linguist, John Corner, Media Studies, University of Liverpool. James Curran, Communication Studies, Goldsmith College. Barbara Epstein, Historian, University of California. Andrew Gamble, Political Economy, University of Sheffield. Chris Hammett, Human Geography, King's College, London. Jean Shaul, Accounting and Finance, University of Manchester. But also professionals like Danny Shelter, who was the executive producer of Globalization in Company, or Hilary Wainwright, an editor of a popular New Left magazine. Well, indeed, the team had a broad range of disciplinary and practical competences, which brought together brings a comprehensive and extensive understanding of the ways newsmaking and broadcasting works. Besides, and this is something which is remarkable, most books and articles were published under the common signature of the group, giving sense to collective works and interdisciplinarity. The other advantage of gathering so many people in that particular group is that the tremendous task to do could be shared by all the members. Let us only mention the unbelievable time dedicated to view all the news reels recorded on videotapes, to analyze them without forgetting the treatment of the collected data. Last but not least, the investigation results have been presented in about 15 or so books, plus a multitude of articles published in some of the best international scientific reviews in social sciences. And they're just like milestone in this intellectual adventure over half a century. And also something which I think is quite interesting in terms of interdisciplinarity. Every book was an opportunity to go back to theoretical and methodological updates that nourish, develop, or summarize reflections on television news. Well, in the end, the interdisciplinary approach allows the member of the group to study the complexity of the processes used in the TV editorial boards without splitting the analysis of journalistic production from a sociology of TV professional or a sociology of the audiences. In this particular context, TV news was studied both from the angle of contents, but also from the angle of journalistic ideology, the news values claimed by the profession, the visual representations of the news, and the political economic background, which structures the whole process of the production of information. And I think for me, this example is a real interesting example to follow. And this is how I would conclude my intervention. Thank you very much for your attention.
Batterie à 100%.
Don't have the sound back. I don't have the sound. Okay.
Oh my God, Professor, you have completely blown us over. You actually typed in Malayalam.
Okay, I'm sorry. The sound was cut, so I just couldn't hear because when I speak, I mean, it automatically turns off the sound of my speakers.
Okay. If there are any questions, I would just like to ask you, Professor, was it the fact that there were so many linguistic minorities in the area you were talking about, like people who spoke Basque, people who spoke Provençal or Irish or Celtic? Was that
Yeah.
what inspired you to work on these minorities or minorized people, etc.? And
Well, there are different factors because, in fact, I studied at the University of Rennes which is university in Brittany, which is the name of the state or the region where I still live, and where, as I said before, where we used to speak a language which is a Celtic language, which is called Breton, and I also studied Breton at the university, and it's a language and in danger because it more or less the number of speakers has drastically been reduced over the years, and there's a process of revitalization. And so my first concern, of course, was linked to this, I would say, personal situation, and it was also a way for me to see how the situation was in other places, for example, in France, but also in Europe. And I had the opportunity to extend my research field in South America, where I've been investigating for the last 20 years, with a lot of field research.
Thanks for that. And in one of the slides you showed, we had a very disturbing kind of thing wherein brutally the funding for humanities is being slashed.
Yeah.
Is that, what do you foresee? Will more governments go the same way, or is there any silver lining for the humanities across the globe? Because from what I understand, in Norway, Sweden, etc., there are certain projects, or there are certain moves from the government to support humanities in an integrated form or in an interdisciplinary form. So what would be your take on that, Professor?
Well, what I can say is that first of all, when I started getting interested in this kind of strange relation with a number of politicians or political governments and social sciences, it started, of course, with things that I had heard in France, from our prime ministers and now our present president Emmanuel Macron, which regularly criticize the social sciences for being too critical, and like I mentioned, a quote from a French sociologist. Social sciences do not excuse it. It's not a matter of excusing, for example, terrorism or separatism or other things, or violence. It's not just it's not the point. But it's just to explain the mechanism of violence, of terrorism, or social inequalities, or for example, dominations of official language over other less spoken languages. So it's not just a matter to explain, for example, violence, but social sciences try to understand and they do not judge. So when I started getting interested in that, was for an article a colleague from South America asked me to write, and I've been trying to check how it was in the rest of the world. And I was quite surprised to see that in every country for the last 20 years, there have been here and there a number of politicians, of heads of governments, of presidents of important nations, who clearly express their mistrust of that kind of critical position, and because they're saying that if you compare social sciences to, for example, what the engineers do, or physicians, or the chemist, well, they're useful because they produce concrete products, So what we're asked to do, instead of criticizing things, is just to help improve the situation and be in a more positivist attitude, to cooperate, and also to act like experts, And so this is mainly the thing I see. And of course, at the same time, when you deal with research or educational authorities or ministries, including in France, I mean, the projects are of course funded, in a more ambitious way. But still, there is a major trend now towards more technical projects, short-term projects. I mean, yeah, now I think it's very difficult to work as a researcher, like we would do for the people of my generation. You just to spend 3, 4, 5, 6 years, to get information, to take the time to gather and to cross this information, and then to write a book or an article, or to organize a conference, international conference. I mean, now you must just like for the researchers in medicine. I mean, they must. There's a fierce competition to. You must produce results, including preliminary or intermediary results. In this new way to carry on investigations. So more or less that was my point.
Thanks, Professor. If any of the participants have a question, they can either unmute themselves, or they can type it in the chat box. In that case, looks like we don't have any questions. So, Professor Guyot, may I just take a moment to officially thank you.
Okay, thank you very much too.
Professor Guyot, you walked us through the interconnection of disciplines. You walked us through the macro, meso, and micro dimensions of the topic. You told us about the common concepts, methods, tools, etc., which are used for humanities. You also spoke about the various ways in which humanities is denigrated, and we all hope that it still stays, and direct and indirect methods like cutting off funding, or putting curbs on the kind of topics that can be taken up for research. Let's hope that these things will not completely erase the impact of humanities. And you told us about the case studies and really exemplified the topic so well. We are really glad that Rose was able to prevail upon you to accept our invitation and deliver this wonderful talk on the interdisciplinary investigation of the relationship between media, culture, and society. Thank you so much for spending time for us.
Okay.
Thanks very much. And someday let's hope that once the pandemic, etc., is over, we can
Okay.
possibly meet in person if you travel this side, or let's hope that there will be opportunities for us to meet in person. Thank you so much, Professor.
Yeah, thank you too. It was a pleasure to be with you today. Okay, I appreciate. And I would like to thank you again, and also Dr. Rose Sebastian.
Thanks, Dr. Jaising. Thanks, Dr. Jaising, Dr. Chitra, and all the participants who joined this session. And we will now move on to the paper presentation session, the links for which have been shared in the WhatsApp group. So thanks once again, Professor.
Okay, well, bye. Take care.
Thank you. Sir, Jai sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Tomorrow morning, which session, sir?
No, tomorrow morning only one session, 2:30.
Oh, tomorrow only one.
We only have one session, and that is
recording stopped.
Interdisciplinary perspectives from South
Okay.
Asia. So,
Okay, ma'am. Okay. That means we can join directly in the morning in the Zoom link, right? In the afternoon.
Morning,
Tomorrow
morning we don't have any session.
Yes,
All right.
ma'am, I'll be sharing the details of the session.
Okay.
Shortly.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. Once again, congrats for the success of day 2.
Thank you. Thank
To you, your team, to all the resource persons. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Chitra.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Shah.
Il faut que je coupe ça, comment ça se fait déjà? Tac.